A hunter trekking across a frozen wasteland. A wild Mustang trapped in the ice, seconds from death. With no one around to save him, no one except one man. He had every reason to walk away, every reason to save himself. But what happened next will leave you speechless. This is a story of survival, sacrifice, and an unbreakable bond between man and horse. The wind cut through the valley like a knife, howling across the frozen landscape with an unforgiving sharpness. Snow swirled in violent gusts, stinging against Ethan Walker's exposed skin. Despite the fur-lined collar of his heavy coat, Montana winters were merciless. But this storm felt different, like it had no intention of letting anything survive. Ethan adjusted the strap of his rifle across his back, his boots crunching over the hardened snow as he pressed forward through the blizzard. He had set out before dawn, hoping to track a deer before the storm worsened. But now he could barely see more than 20 feet ahead. The world was nothing but white, a vast, endless expanse of frozen death. He exhaled, his breath escaping. In a thick cloud of mist, the hunt was over. He needed to turn back before the storm buried him alive. But then he saw a dark shape in the distance. At first, it was just a shadow against the endless white, blurred by the swirling snow. His instincts tensed. Was it a predator, a fallen tree? But as he moved closer, the shadow twitched. His heartbeat kicked up. It was alive. Ethan squinted through the storm. The shape wasn't moving much. Something was wrong. With steady steps, he trudged closer, his grip tightening on his rifle. Not out of fear, but preparation. If an animal were injured, it might lash out in desperation. But as he broke through the last curtain of snowfall, his breath caught in his throat. A massive Mustang horse was struggling in the middle of the frozen lake, not on ice, but in it. The frozen lake had fractured beneath the Mustang's weight, leaving a gaping hole where dark, freezing water churned violently. The horse's powerful body was half submerged, his front hooves scraping desperately against the jagged edges of ice, trying to pull himself free. Ethan could hear the frantic gasps of the animal's breath and see the violent tremors racking his soaked body. Ice clung to his black coat, his mane and tail dripping with frozen water that turned to stiff icicles against his skin. His dark eyes were wide with exhaustion and fear, flaring with each desperate attempt to climb onto the ice, only to slip back into the freezing depths again. He's drowning. The realization hit Ethan like a hammer to the chest. This horse was dying in front of him, and if he didn't act soon, the ice would claim him. But there was a problem. The ice was thin. If he rushed in recklessly, he'd go under too. Ethan glanced around, his survival instincts kicking in. The lake stretched far and wide, its surface cracked in places from the storm's fury. The Mustang must have wandered onto it unknowingly, only for the ice to give way beneath his weight. The smart choice, the safe choice, would be to leave, let nature take its course. It wasn't his fight, but Ethan's feet didn't move. His mind screamed at him to turn around, to save himself, but his heart had already made the decision. He slung his rifle off his back and muttered under his breath, "Damn it." Then he ran toward the ice. Ethan's boots slid as he sprinted toward the frozen lake, his breath sharp in his chest. The icy wind lashed at his face, cutting through the thick layers of his coat. But he ignored the pain. The only thing that mattered was the horse, fighting, struggling, slipping deeper into the freezing abyss. The Mustang's massive black body trembled violently, its powerful legs kicking at the ice. But the slick surface refused to give him the leverage he needed. He was losing the fight. His movements were slowing, his flared nostrils barely managing to pull in shaky, uneven breaths. The cold was shutting him down. Ethan skidded to his knees, his body landing dangerously close to the fractured ice. The Mustang flinched, his dark eyes rolling with fear, unsure if the man approaching was a rescuer or a threat. "Easy," Ethan muttered, his voice low but firm, carrying through the howling wind. His instinct screamed at him to move carefully. One wrong step, and they'd both go under. Ethan reached out, testing the ice around him. It groaned, threatening to give way. The lake had already taken half the horse. It wouldn't hesitate to take him too. The Mustang kicked again, his hooves smashing against the brittle ice, sending shards flying. Ethan winced. The hole was widening. The more the horse fought, the worse his chances became. Think, damn it, Ethan needed a rope. Something strong enough to pull the horse free. He patted his coat pockets, nothing useful. He had his rifle, a hunting knife, and a few supplies, but no rope. His heart pounded as he scanned the frozen wasteland. He had seconds, maybe a minute at best, before the horse's body locked up completely. Use what you have. Ethan's fingers moved to his waist, yanking his thick leather belt free. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. Lying flat against the ice, he stretched the belt toward the Mustang's muzzle, inching forward as much as he dared. "Come on, big guy," he muttered through clenched teeth. "Take it." The Mustang snorted weakly, his body shaking so hard Ethan could see the tremors running through his soaked muscles. The stallion's legs were barely kicking now, his chest heaving as if trying to decide whether to keep fighting or let go. Ethan gritted his teeth and pushed forward. The belt brushed against the Mustang's frozen lips, but he didn't bite down. Ethan cursed under his breath. "Come on, damn it." Then something shifted. The Mustang's dark eyes flickered as if somewhere inside his freezing, exhausted mind, he understood. With a final burst of instinct, the Mustang lunged forward, his teeth clamping down on the belt. Ethan didn't hesitate. He yanked with everything he had. The Mustang kicked hard, his front hooves catching the ice, clawing at the frozen edge. His body lifted just enough, then the ice beneath Ethan shattered. A heartbeat later, the freezing abyss swallowed him whole. The shock of the freezing water hit Ethan like a hammer. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before, a brutal, unforgiving cold that stole the breath from his lungs and sent a violent jolt through his entire body. His instinct screamed at him to move, to fight, but the ice-cold water paralyzed his muscles in an instant. His vision blurred as he plunged deeper, the weight of his soaked coat dragging him down like an anchor. His boots scraped against nothing but empty water, and for a moment, panic crept in. "Get out." Now, Ethan forced his arms to move, kicking hard and reaching for the edge of the ice above him. His fingers brushed against the frozen surface, but the thick layer of frost was too slick, too solid to grip. The water was dragging him deeper, stealing the heat from his body, second by second. And then he heard it, a desperate, frantic splash beside him. Through the haze of the water, he saw movement, a massive black form thrashing wildly, fighting just as hard as he was. The Mustang. He was still in the water, still fighting. Ethan's survival instincts overpowered his shock. He lunged toward the Mustang, forcing his body through the icy resistance. The stallion's hoof kicked blindly, sending bursts of frozen water crashing into Ethan's face, but Ethan didn't stop. He had made a choice to save this horse, and he wasn't about to let them both die. Gritting his teeth, he lunged forward, one arm wrapping around the Mustang's thick, trembling neck. The stallion snorted, thrashing in panic, but Ethan held on tight, his fingers gripping the horse's soaked mane. "Easy, big guy." He gritted through clenched teeth. "I've got you." But he had no idea how he was going to get them out. The ice creaked above them, the edges of the hole glistening with a deadly, deceptive stillness. The cold bit through Ethan's skin, his hands burning from the sheer intensity of it. The Mustang was shaking violently, his muscles locking up from the cold. Ethan knew he had seconds, maybe a minute, before the stallion's body shut down completely. And if the horse went under, there was no pulling him back. Not happening. Ethan muttered. His fingers moved instinctively, reaching for the soaked leather belt still wrapped around the Mustang's muzzle. His arms were numb, but he forced his muscles to obey. One shot, one chance. With every last ounce of strength, Ethan threw the end of the belt up onto the ice, looping it over a thick chunk of solid surface just beyond the broken edge. The leather caught barely, but it was enough. Now he had to pull. Ethan gritted his teeth and yanked hard, digging his boots into the freezing slush beneath him. The Mustang let out a sharp, desperate cry, his legs kicking wildly beneath the water as he tried to follow Ethan's lead. "Come on," Ethan shouted, his breath ragged. "Move, damn it." The stallion's hoof scraped against the ice again, this time finding just enough traction to lift his massive body up. Ethan pulled harder, his arms screaming in pain, his frozen fingers barely responding. His vision darkened at the edges. his lungs burning, but then the Mustang's front legs hooked onto the solid ice. A deep, guttural sound tore from the stallion's chest as he kicked with everything he had left. The muscles in his shoulders flexed and strained, and with a final agonizing push, he lunged forward. The Mustang collapsed onto the ice, his massive body shaking, his breath coming out in sharp, heavy gasps. He was out, but Ethan wasn't. The moment the stallion freed himself, the remaining ice beneath Ethan gave way. He felt himself drop deeper, the freezing darkness closing in. A brutal, crushing weight pressed down on his chest. The cold was winning. For the first time, he felt his body giving up. The last thing he saw before his head slipped beneath the water was the Mustang standing over him, watching, and then everything went black. The water was pulling him under. Ethan barely felt the impact when his head slipped beneath the icy surface, only the crushing, paralyzing cold that wrapped around his chest like a vice. His lungs seized, his vision darkened, and his body was numb, sinking like dead weight. The world faded into silence. Is this it? Somewhere far above the surface, he thought he heard a sound, a sharp, heavy snort, hooves scraping against the ice, but his body was failing him. His thoughts were slipping away. The cold was winning. Then a sudden, violent jolt. Something grabbed him, or rather, something hooked onto his coat, yanking him upward with brute force. His head broke through the surface, and a sharp, freezing gust of air slammed into his lungs. He coughed violently, his body racked with tremors, but something was keeping him from going under again. He gasped, struggling to focus, and then he saw it. The Mustang, the massive stallion, still panting from his own escape, had planted his powerful hooves on the solid ice and was gripping Ethan's coat collar with his teeth. The horse was pulling him out. Ethan could hardly process it. A wild animal, one that had barely trusted him moments ago, was saving his life. The stallion grunted, straining, his muscles flexing as he backed up slowly, dragging Ethan toward the thicker ice. Ethan's frozen hands clawed at the edge, his arms screaming in protest, but he forced himself to push up, kicking against the freezing slush. The Mustang didn't let go. With one final lurch, Ethan hauled himself onto the ice, collapsing onto the solid ground. His body shook violently, his teeth chattering so hard his jaw ached. He was alive, and the Mustang had saved him. For several long moments, neither of them moved. The storm howled around them, but all Ethan could hear was his own ragged breathing and the deep, heavy exhales of the stallion beside him. Ethan rolled onto his side, forcing his numb fingers to move as he pushed himself up onto his elbows. He turned his head, locking eyes with the Mustang. The stallion stood a few feet away, his massive frame still trembling, his breath clouding the air in thick puffs. His dark coat was soaked, his black mane stiff with frozen water, but his stance was strong. His wild eyes met Ethan's, unblinking. The cowboy's heart slammed against his ribs. They weren't just looking at each other, they were acknowledging each other. Ethan let out a breathless, stunned laugh. "You really are something, aren't you?" he murmured, his voice hoarse. The Mustang snorted, shaking his massive head. For the first time, Ethan saw something in the horse's eyes that hadn't been there before: trust. A moment later, the stallion took a slow step back, then another. Ethan's chest tightened. The Mustang was going to leave. Of course, he was. That's what wild horses did. But then, he stopped. Ethan barely breathed as the stallion paused, his ears flicking back toward him, as if he were waiting, not running, not fleeing, waiting. Ethan swallowed hard, ignoring the ache in his frozen limbs as he forced himself to his feet. His voice was raw when he spoke. "Are you sticking around? Or what?" The Mustang didn't move, didn't run, didn't leave. Ethan's breath fogged in the air as he took a single step forward. The stallion watched him carefully, his muscles still taut, his instincts still wild, but he didn't back away. Ethan nodded. For now, that was enough. Ethan's legs felt like lead as he took a shaky step forward. The cold had sunk deep into his bones, and every movement sent a fresh wave of pain through his stiff, half-frozen muscles. His soaked clothes clung to his skin, offering zero protection against the bitter wind. But none of that mattered, because the Mustang was still standing there, Ethan had expected the stallion to bolt the second he could, disappearing into the wilderness like he was meant to. But he hadn't. He was waiting. The storm howled around them, thick snowflakes falling in sheets, coating the frozen landscape. In endless white, the Mustang stood strong despite the cold, his powerful legs locked in place, his dark coat still dripping with half-frozen water. Ethan kept his steps slow and careful, watching the Mustang's body language. The stallion's ears twitched, his muscles flexing, but he didn't retreat. Ethan stopped a few feet away, letting his breath fog the air between them. "You don't have to stay," he murmured, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. The Mustang snorted, shaking his massive head, sending bits of frozen water flying from his mane. Ethan huffed a laugh. Shifting his weight, his body was begging him to sit, to rest, but he knew if he did, he might not get back up. The cold was still a threat. He glanced toward the tree line in the distance. His cabin was too far. If he didn't move now, he'd never make it back. His gaze flickered back to the Mustang. A crazy idea crept into his mind, but he shoved it away. No, the horse won't let you near him. Still, if there was ever a chance, this was it. Taking a slow breath, Ethan extended his hand, palm facing down, careful not to make any sudden movements. The Mustang's ears twitched, his nostrils flaring slightly. Ethan held his breath, waiting. This was the test. Either the stallion would accept him, or he'd be left alone to freeze to death. Seconds passed, then the Mustang did something Ethan hadn't expected. He lowered his head, just slightly. Ethan swallowed hard, his fingers aching with cold as he took another step closer. The Mustang didn't move away. He slowly, carefully, let his hand graze the stallion's damp muzzle. The Mustang's skin twitched, but he didn't pull back. Ethan exhaled, something tight in his chest loosening. "You're something else, you know that," he muttered, barely believing what was happening. The stallion huffed, hot breath misting the cold air between them. Ethan knew he didn't have much time. His body was shutting down, the cold becoming unbearable. He had to get moving now. For the first time in years, Ethan did something he never thought he would do again. He reached for a wild horse. Slowly, he gripped the Mustang's soaked mane, his fingers frozen stiff, but holding on. The Mustang tensed but didn't bolt. Ethan braced himself, took a deep breath, and pulled himself onto the stallion's back. The Mustang shifted beneath him, muscles coiling, uncertain. Ethan held firm, waiting for the inevitable fight, but it never came. Instead, the Mustang snorted, his hooves stamping into the snow, but he remained still. Ethan felt a rush of something he hadn't felt in years, hope. He leaned forward, whispering, "Let's go home, big guy." And with that, the Mustang moved. The Mustang's hooves crunched through the deep snow, moving carefully over the frozen ground. Ethan felt every powerful step beneath him, his own body numb and aching. But he knew they had no choice but to keep going. The wind had not eased, and the snow continued to fall in thick waves, blurring the world around them. Ethan could barely see the tree line ahead, but he knew exactly where they needed to go: his cabin, shelter. If they didn't make it soon, they'd both freeze to death. Ethan tightened his grip on the Mustang's thick mane, his fingers barely responding from the cold. His body rocked with every stride, his frozen muscles screaming in protest, but he held on. The stallion moved forward without hesitation, his body still trembling from the icy lake. But his spirit was strong. Ethan leaned forward, his lips numb as he murmured, "Just a little farther, big guy." The Mustang snorted, his ears flicking at the sound of Ethan's voice, but he didn't slow. The storm was still brutal, the wind cutting through them both. But Ethan focused on the movement, the rhythm of hooves against the frozen earth. One step at a time, one breath at a time. Then the Mustang froze. His entire body went rigid, ears snapping forward, muscles coiled with sudden tension. Ethan's pulse spiked. "What is it?" he muttered, forcing himself to sit upright despite the stiffness in his limbs. The Mustang's breathing changed, his nostrils flaring in sharp bursts. Then a sound, faint but unmistakable, a low, guttural growl. Ethan went still. The storm had masked it at first, but now he could hear it. Movement in the snow, rustling between the trees. They weren't alone. Ethan's instinct screamed at him before his eyes caught the movement. Shadows. 3, maybe 4, emerging from the tree line. That wolf's dot. His breath hitched, his frozen fingers twitching toward the rifle strapped to his back. The Mustang stomped his front hooves, a deep warning snort ripping from his throat. But the wolves didn't scatter. They were watching, waiting. Ethan could see the hunger in their glowing eyes. They weren't afraid. They had been following, tracking Dot, and now they saw an opportunity. Ethan clenched his jaw, his heartbeat pounding. He knew that in his weakened state, he wasn't a threat to them. But the Mustang, he was injured, cold, tired, vulnerable. The lead wolf, a massive gray beast with thick fur and piercing yellow eyes, lowered himself into a stalking stance, muscles tensed, ready to lunge. Ethan's fingers closed around his rifle strap, but before he could even pull it loose, the Mustang moved. With a furious bellow, the stallion reared onto his hind legs, his front hooves kicking into the air. His muscles rippled with raw power, breath exploding into thick mist. The wolves flinched, startled by the sudden display of strength, but the leader held his ground, ears flattened, fangs flashing in the dim light. Ethan's grip on the Mustang's mane tightened. Easy, boy, he muttered, voice low. But the Mustang wasn't backing down. He stomped forward, hooves slamming into the snow, sending an unmistakable warning. The standoff held for a moment, tense, dangerous. Then, a shift. One of the wolves, a younger, thinner one, let out a sharp yelp and backed away. Then another followed. Finally, the leader growled low, eyes still locked onto the Mustang, but he took a step back. Then another, and just like that, they were gone. They melted into the snow, vanishing into the storm. Ethan exhaled, his chest tight with relief. He reached up, running a shaking hand down the Mustang's damp neck. You really don't give up, do you? He murmured. The Mustang snorted. Ethan let out a weak, breathless laugh. Then, through the thick falling snow, he saw it. His cabin, a small, dark silhouette, barely visible against the storm. They had made it. Ethan clutched the Mustang's mane and whispered, almost home, big guy. And with that, the stallion moved forward, leading them into the storm one last time. The cabin was so close that Ethan could almost feel the warmth of the fire waiting inside. But his body was giving up. His vision blurred, the relentless cold sinking deep into his bones, dragging him down into a dangerous haze of exhaustion and numbness. His grip on the Mustang's mane was weakening, his fingers barely responding. Every breath felt heavier, every movement like wading through thick ice. Just a few more steps. The Mustang seemed to sense it. The stallion let out a low, determined snort, picking up his pace. His hooves cut through the deep snow with purpose, breath coming in thick white clouds. His body still trembled, but he refused to stop, and neither would Ethan. He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to hold on. His body swayed in the saddleless ride. The porch was only a few yards away now. Almost there. Almost home. Then darkness. Ethan's body went limp, his frozen fingers slipping from the Mustang's mane. And he fell. The world faded in and out. He wasn't sure how much time had passed, but something warm was pressing against him. A heavy, solid presence. His senses flickered back, just enough to feel the rough wooden porch beneath him, the snow melting against the heat of his half-frozen skin. And then a deep exhale. Ethan forced his eyes open, his breath shallow. The Mustang. The massive stallion was standing over him, dark eyes filled with something Ethan had never seen before, concern. The Mustang had nudged him onto the porch. Ethan let out a hoarse, breathless chuckle. You're not just a horse, he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. You're a damn miracle. The stallion snorted, his ears flicking forward as if he understood every word. Ethan's arms trembled as he forced himself to move, dragging his half-frozen body toward the cabin door. His fingers barely worked, but somehow he managed to get inside. The warmth hit him instantly. The crackling of the dying fire was the only sound in the room. He barely had the strength to stand, but he turned back toward the door, heart hammering. The Mustang was still standing there, his dark silhouette framed by the raging storm. Ethan swallowed hard. Everything in his mind told him this was it. The Mustang was wild, free, This had never been his home. Ethan expected him to leave, but he didn't. Instead, the Mustang took a step forward. Ethan's breath caught. Then the stallion stepped onto the porch and didn't move. Ethan let out a slow exhale, something tight in his chest breaking loose. "You want to stay?" he asked quietly. The Mustang lowered his head. His deep, dark eyes locked onto Ethan's. And Ethan knew this wasn't ownership. This wasn't taming. This was trust. Ethan nodded. "All right then, big guy." And with that, he left the door open. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone anymore. Ethan and the Mustang didn't just survive. They found something far greater. A bond that neither of them expected but both of them needed. This wasn't just about a rescue. It was about trust, courage, and second chances. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like this video, and share it with someone who loves powerful stories of survival and connection. Let's keep spreading inspiring stories that remind us of the strength of the human and animal spirit.